Good morning. It is Tuesday, November the 27th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. This is the show for the butchers, the bakers, and the candlestick makers, for those people that like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, but want more. Those people that are asking, what can I do? The way that the left is influencing this country politically is through our culture. And the way they do that very often is through slogans, by using the technique of what Ayn Rand called anti-concepts. You want to obliterate a particular concept, what you do is you replace it with a new one. So if you want to get rid of the concept of conflict of interest, you bring in the term stakeholders, and you get people to use that term, stakeholders, instead of conflict of interest. And then that way, when the term conflict of interest goes out of use, it's effectively been obliterated, and everything that goes with it, all the meanings that go with it. One of the concepts that's fairly new, that's culturally affecting, is the slogan, "You're perfect just the way you are." I've heard this slogan over and over and over again in television, in commercials, in TV shows, movies. I've seen it in magazines. I've seen it on bumper stickers. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And because everybody seems to go along with it. Conservatives just go ahead and go along with it. Oh, okay, you're perfect just the way you are. It's a tempting message to believe in, because again, it means that I don't have to work on myself. I don't have to make any adjustments. I don't have to try to become a better person. Now, the corollary to you're perfect just the way you are is it's everybody else that's the problem. That's the unspoken part of that message. It's the rest of society, the rest of the world. And what they're setting you up to do is to be a revolutionary. And the idea then is, when the leaders of the left stand up and start calling for action in certain particular ways, this needs to change, that needs to change. We need $15 an hour minimum wage. You're going to go for it, right? Because instead of saying to yourself, well, you know what? I don't have enough money. I go to work. I don't have enough money to pay my rent. I don't have enough money to make ends meet. I don't have enough money to support my family. Instead of saying there, what is it that I can do, looking at yourself and saying, well, you know what, maybe I need to get a second job. Or maybe what I need to do is get a better job. Or what I need to do is get promoted. If I work at McDonald's and I'm getting $8 an hour and I want to make more money, usually the way it's going to be done is you're going to go ahead and try to get promoted, become an assistant manager, a shift leader, a manager. And at McDonald's, you don't necessarily have to have a bachelor's degree to get into management. You just have to go to one of their management schools. So being upwardly mobile is something that a person can do for themselves by looking at themselves and saying, hey, where do I come up short here? I don't have enough experience, I don't have enough education, whatever the case may be, and fixing that. Instead, what you end up doing is saying, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm out doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm working. The workplace just isn't providing me with enough money. So when somebody comes out and says, hey, Mr. Conservative, we want a $15 an hour minimum wage, you're more likely to go along with that idea. Because again, I'm not going to look at myself. Don't look at me. I'm not the problem. Everybody else is. Society is. The place where I work is the problem. Or the state of California is the problem because it has a low minimum wage. And it's simply not true. It used to be in this country that instead of having the slogan, you're perfect just the way you are, we had the opposite slogan. The slogan was, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. And so that, again, that mindset is nobody's perfect, but everybody can work on themselves. There are things that I can do to make myself a better person, a better family member, a better worker or employee, or maybe even a better boss, a better CEO, a better supervisor. But the point is, it starts with me. And the corollary slogan we used to have was, better the world than start with yourself. And those are slogans that need to make a comeback. If you're conservative and you're saying, hey, you're perfect just the way you are, sorry, you're being a lefty. If you want to be a conservative, tell people nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect, and change the world, then start with yourself. When I come back, the Ayn Rand lexicon. Thank you very much. And the Ayn Rand lexicon, which is an excellent book because it reminds us that, yes, words are arbitrary, sensible signs with meanings imposed on them by convention, but concepts are not. Concepts are deep and meaningful. And that's what the lexicon tries to get down to, is the concepts, which is essences, basically. What is the essence of something versus the accident? Essences and accidents. Today's concept, courage and confidence. Courage and confidence are practical necessities. Courage is the practical form of being true to existence, of being true to truth, and confidence is the practical form of being true to one's own consciousness. Deep. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading. Yesterday, I was reading from the 13 Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. And we had gotten to rule number 10, and I only got that far because I had a sample of the book on my phone. So I went ahead and I got the full book, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up where I left off yesterday when I come back. And thank you very much. And Saul Alinsky and the Rules for Radicals. Saul Alinsky goes way back. He's like born in 1909 or something like that. And he was a left-wing agitator throughout his life, 20s and 30s. And I think he died in 1970 or something of that nature. But so anyways, he was the one that came up with the Rules for Radicals. And where we'd left off last time was on the 10th rule. The major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain a constant pressure upon the opposition. The 11th rule is, if you push a negative hard and deep enough, it will break through into its counter side. This is based on the principle that every positive has its negative. We have already seen the conversion of the negative into the positive in Mahatma Gandhi's development of the tactic of passive resistance. One corporation we organized against responded to the continuous application of pressure by burglarizing my home, and then using the keys taken in the burglary to burglarize the offices of the Industrial Areas Foundation, where I work. The panic in this corporation was clear from the nature of the burglaries, for nothing was taken in either burglary to make it seem that the thieves were interested in ordinary loot. They took only the records that applied to the corporation. Even the most amateurish burglar would have had more sense than to do what the private detective agency hired by that corporation did. The police departments in California and Chicago agreed that, quote, the corporation might just as well have left its fingerprints all over the place, unquote. In a fight, almost anything goes. It almost reaches the point where you stop to apologize if a chance blow lands above the belt. When a corporation bungles like the one that burglarized my home and office, my visible public reaction is shock, horror, and moral outrage. In this case, we let it be known that sooner or later it would be confronted with this crime, as well as with a whole series of other derelictions, before a United States Senate subcommittee investigation. Once sworn in with congressional immunity, we would make these actions public. This threat, plus the fact that an attempt on my life had been made in Southern California, had the corporation on a spot where it would be publicly suspect in the event of assassination. At one point, I found myself in a 30-room motel in which every other room was occupied by their security men. This became another devil in the closet to haunt this corporation and to keep the pressure on. The 12th rule: the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. You cannot risk being trapped by the enemy in his sudden agreement with your demand and saying, "You're right, we don't know what to do about this issue, now you tell us." The 13th rule: pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. In conflict tactics, there are certain rules that the organizer should always regard as universalities. One is that the opposition must be singled out as the target and frozen. By this, I mean that in a complex, interrelated urban society, it becomes increasingly difficult to single out who is to blame for any particular evil. There is a constant and somewhat legitimate passing of the buck. In these times of urbanization, complex metropolitan governments, the complexities of major interlocked corporations, and the interlocking of political life between cities and counties and metropolitan authorities, the problem that threatens to loom more and more is that of identifying the enemy. Obviously, there is no point to tactics unless one has a target upon which to center the attacks. One big problem is a constant shifting of responsibility from one jurisdiction to another. Individuals and bureaus, one after another, disclaim responsibility for particular conditions, attributing the authority for any change to some other force. In a corporation, one gets the situation where the president of the corporation says that he does not have the responsibility. It is up to the board of trustees or the board of directors. The board of directors can shift it over to the stockholders, etc., etc. And the same thing goes, for example, on the Board of Education appointments in the city of Chicago, where an extra-legal committee is empowered to make selections of nominees for the board, and the mayor then uses his legal powers to select names from that list. When the mayor is attacked for not having any blacks on the list, he shifts the responsibility over to the committee, pointing out that he has to select those names from a list of submitted by the committee, and if the list is all white, then he has no responsibility. The committee can shift the responsibility back by pointing out that it is the mayor who has the authority to select the names. And so it goes in a comic, if it were not so tragic, routine of, quote, who's on first, unquote, or, quote, under which shell is the P hidden, unquote. The same evasion of responsibility is to be found in all areas of life and other areas of City Hall urban renewal departments, who say the responsibility's over here and somebody else says the responsibility's over there. The city says it's a state responsibility, the state says it's a federal responsibility, and the federal government passes it back to the local community, and on ad infinitum. It should be borne in mind that the target is always trying to shift responsibility to get out of being the target. There's a constant squirming and moving and strategy, purposeful and malicious at times, other times just for straight survival on the part of the designated target. The forces for change must keep this in mind and pin the target down securely. If an organization permits responsibility to be diffused and distributed in a number of areas, attack becomes impossible. One of the things that I wanted to note is actually the classic example of the shifting of responsibility is with computers. If you ever have anybody's ever had problems with their computer and then calls customer service and says, hey, usually you're going to start with, I guess, let's say you have Hewlett-Packard. So you call Hewlett-Packard and you say, there's a problem with your computer. And so then the computer people will say, well, no, we make the hardware. Somebody else makes the software. Microsoft makes the software, for instance. Okay, we make the hardware. There's nothing wrong with our computer. It's not a hardware problem. It's a software problem. So you got to go to Microsoft and talk to them. So you think, oh, okay. So you call Microsoft and say, hey, I just talked to Hewlett-Packard and they said that I've got a software problem. And then Microsoft says, maybe Microsoft might even do some diagnostics or whatever. But they'll come back and tell you, no, there's nothing wrong with our software. It's a hardware problem. And so now you're stuck. And again, there's no way to fix who it is that's responsible and who therefore should make this problem right, and perhaps more importantly, do so under any existing warranty so that you don't end up having to pay for it. So I wanted to interject that real quickly. Let me see. Let's see. I want to see how far this is going to go. This is going to way into it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that for right now. I also have another little book I don't think I've been reading from yet, but we'll see. And it is called The Rules for Radicals Defeated. And that's up next. Thank you very much. Back to Rules for Radicals, but this time, Rules for Radicals Defeated. So when we left this, we were talking about community organizers. So why are we suddenly hearing more and more about the seemingly obscure and rather outdated community organizer? Many on the left would have us believe that the name Saul Alinsky is some sort of right-wing boogeyman, and that those who mention him in relation to Barack Obama are nothing more than alarmists or racists seeking to besmirch the president. The right, to its credit, has grown increasingly aware of Saul Alinsky and Rules for Radicals. A close examination of Obama and the people that he surrounds himself with reveals a group of politicians who rely almost exclusively on the tactics explained in Rules for Radicals. When you understand those tactics, it paints a picture of the way in which Obama and his people operate, and it's not a pretty picture. Alinsky tactics are ruthless even by the standards of modern-day American politics. As I said, the left does its part to make us believe that Alinsky-Obama connection is a fabrication of, as Hillary Clinton once famously said, quote, a vast right-wing conspiracy, unquote. In the pages that follow, I will demonstrate the Alinsky-Obama connection, just why the Alinsky model is such a dangerous one, and how we, as ordinary citizens, can fight back against this pernicious anti-American philosophy. In a recent Republican debate, Newt Gingrich said, quote, those two choices, I believe, will give the American people a chance to decide permanently whether we want to remain the historic America that has provided opportunity for more people of more backgrounds than any country in history, or whether, in fact, we prefer to become a brand new secular European-style bureaucratic socialist system. The America of the Declaration of Independence versus the America of Saul Alinsky. The America of paychecks versus the America of food stamps. The America of independence versus the America of dependence. The America of strength in foreign policy versus the America of weakness in foreign policy, unquote. Suddenly, the subject of Saul Alinsky had become no longer merely the fodder of conservative radio talk shows or Fox News opinion shows like Sean Hannity. Now, Alinsky and his tactics had found their way, about 4 years too late, I might add, front and center in American presidential politics. The left, however, still seeks to cloister Alinsky as though his tactics are either quaint and innocent or simply not relevant. A recent Huffington Post article was entitled, Saul Alinsky, quote, a GOP boogeyman who influences many on the left and right, unquote. In that article, the author, Luke Johnson, attempts to both paint Alinsky as an innocuous figure and simultaneously distance Barack Obama from Alinsky's teachings. He quotes from an article by Ryan Lizza, quote, however, although Obama didn't quite find himself reliving the civil rights era, he soon found himself succumbing to the appeal of Alinsky's organizing methodology. In Dreams, Obama spent some 150 pages on his 4 years in Chicago working as an organizer, but there's little discussion of the theory that undergirded his work and informed that of his teachers. Alinsky is the missing layer of his account, unquote. He goes on to say that Obama has been critical of Alinsky. Specifically, he quotes Obama as saying, quote, it's true that the notion of self-interest was critical, unquote, says Obama to Lizza. Quote, but Alinsky understated the degree to which people's hopes and dreams and their ideals and their values were just as important in organizing as people's self-interest, unquote. This quote makes Obama sound somehow idealistic rather than ideological. It paints him as selfless and compassionate, a man simply seeking to help his fellow man find his way. What Johnson fails to quote from that article by Lizza is the following, quote, not long after Obama arrived, he sat down for a cup of coffee in Hyde Park with a fellow organizer named Mike Kruglich. Obama's work focused on helping poor blacks on Chicago's South Side fight the city for things like job banks and asbestos removal. His teachers were schooled in a style of organizing devised by Saul Alinsky, the radical University of Chicago-trained social scientist. At the heart of the Alinsky method is the concept of agitation, making someone angry enough about the rotten state of his life that he agrees to take action to change it, or, as Alinsky himself described the job, to, quote, rub raw the sores of discontent, unquote. Such convenient editing, even of his own material, is common on both sides of the political spectrum, and it is wrong no matter which side is engaging in such scurrilous behavior. That point aside, these 2007 articles already painted the picture of a young Barack Obama who bought into Saul Alinsky's amoral tactics. We see a young Obama bent on change defined as good only in the minds of those doing the changing, and change that gave no thought to the morality of the means by which it was actuated. Soon this, quote, hope and change, unquote, candidate would have audiences swooning with his soaring rhetoric, but it's doubtful that those throngs of admirers truly understood just what type of change Barack Obama had in mind. Could they possibly have understood what he meant when he declared prior to the 2008 presidential election, quote, in 5 days we are going to fundamentally transform America, unquote. Little did people know that Obama was lifting his Hope and Change campaign straight from the pages of his leftist counterculture guidebook. In Rules for Radicals, Alinsky says, quote, the organizer's job is to inseminate an invitation for himself, to agitate, introduce ideas, get people pregnant with hope and a desire for change, and to identify you as the person most qualified for this purpose, unquote. In fact, Rules for Radicals is riddled with comments about hope and change. The idea of change is the central theme of the book. But the type of change Alinsky envisioned is probably not the type of change Americans were seeking in 2008. The country was war-weary and in the midst of a financial crisis, the likes of which it had not seen for 50 years. Hope to Obama's adoring throngs meant jobs, a solid financial sector, a graceful way out of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and much more. But it is almost certain that those listening to Obama in 2008 never thought that change meant all-out class warfare. However, it is class warfare in the style of Karl Marx that litters the pages of Alinsky's book, and it is Alinsky's book that served as the manual for the Obama campaign staff. The left would have you believe that any adherence by the president or his staff to Alinsky's Rules for Radicals is the product of the fevered imaginations of paranoid right-wingers. So, let us examine the connection between Obama and Alinsky and whether that connection is a cause for concern. So, next time we'll pick up here where it says the Obama-Alinsky connection. And that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill, and until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.